It's another piping hot day in sprawling, loud Riyadh. There is construction everywhere you look and everywhere you hear. But I'm gonna jump in this little hotel pool. That's refreshing. This pool is so small on this hotel rooftop that I've been here for 3 days, and it's been filled with children the entire time I've been here, and I haven't actually been able to use it because it's too crowded. You know, one of my thoughts about Saudi is that it immediately struck me as a place that I need to come to more than one time. It's almost like you have to sort of come here, have a bunch of sort of travel disasters, and then learn the place, and then come back with a more like organized plan and much more money, and be prepared to rent a car and kind of do it in the right way. And doing this overland trip, I'm definitely not doing it in that manner. The type of travel that I'm trying to do here just really isn't possible. You know, so many of the things I want to do are just incredibly expensive, just difficult to access. It's just not easy to travel here. It's worth coming here. It's interesting. It's cool being in this kind of first wave of Western tourists in Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's definitely something to be said for that, to be here in this time. So, I mean, I guess in a certain way it's kind of a sacrifice, but it's just like coming here on Eid, I've made so many mistakes about like how expensive the hotels were going to be, and I've misgamed out every possible thing. Like, for example, this hotel that I'm staying in, this which is a Centro Rotana. Like, I thought after Eid that the room prices would go down and I might stay here longer, right? No. After Eid, the room prices actually went up. And I asked the guy at the front desk, I booked another night, and I said, why are the room prices? I said, the Eid holiday is over. I said, aren't you going to have less guests? And shouldn't the price maybe go down a little bit? And he goes, no. He goes, this is a business hotel. He goes, our prices were low for Eid because this isn't a family hotel. Just putting it in the kind of within the confines of the local Saudi cultural norms, which is something that you just can't know, no matter how many books you read about Saudi Arabia or how many documentaries you watch about it. This is the kind of stuff that you can only learn by doing. Saudi Arabia is very much a experiential place. It is a place in transition, and it's a place that you have to come here to figure it out. You know, watching other YouTubers, like watching people in the first wave of vloggers and social media, like influencer types, some of whom I'm pretty sure were invited here and, you know, maybe traveled for free. The people that were like staying at the resorts in Al Ula and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that is not at all the reality. Like it's sort of the YouTubers, Saudi Arabia 1.0 that were here. Like especially the ones that were here just before the pandemic, a lot of the travel that they're doing, I'm finding in my experience, it's not really realistic, you know. And the other thing I would say is that I was too lazy or just didn't want to get involved enough maybe to try the couch surfing thing. But I think that something like that it's essential here, because as a really nice Kareem driver I met last night on a failed outing to go to this place called the Boulevard, which it turned out you weren't allowed to go there for the next 3 days or something because it was at capacity, said to me, he said, Saudi Arabia is a country where you really need to know people. He said the tourism sector here is almost non-existent, or it's in its infancy. So it is not a place where, it's not like Jordan where you show up and, you know, there's the Jordan Pass and everyone's on this kind of well-worn tourist trail of Petra and Wadi Rum and all that. It's like, this is nothing like that. The distances are huge. Like, Saudi Arabia is just so much bigger than Iraq or Jordan or anywhere else that I've been on this trip. It's like, it's a whole different ball game here, entirely. Again, super interesting. But it's not a relaxing place to travel. I'm trying to figure out, you know, how to get to the United Arab Emirates by taxi, and I've been here for 3 days, and so far I haven't figured it out. And there's nothing on Google, and all of the stuff on YouTube is like people from India and Pakistan that like have their own cars and stuff, and there's just meaning the videos that are in Hindi and Urdu and those South Asian languages, and there's just really little information about the kind of travel that I like to do and the kind of travel that I've been doing on this channel. I came to an old part of Riyadh, what I think is part of its original downtown core, called Al Bata, and it seems to me to be almost evenly split between Pakistanis and Bangladeshis, although there are of course some Saudis and some Indians and a handful of Africans here. And my idea of coming here was to see if I could complete my 4th and final imagined border crossing from Saudi Arabia to the Abu Dhabi Emirate in the UAE. But I think I'm essentially throwing in the towel on this idea. So there are buses here and there are shared taxis, but they all go to the Hijaz. They go to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and also to Jeddah on the Red Sea coast. I spoke, and the Kareem driver, he said only speak Arabic, don't speak English. So, you know, he instructed me where to come and everything. I gave it a damn good effort, but I was basically told that there really isn't anything organized like that, which I'm aware of, but I don't know, maybe I just didn't make the right human connection. So I am actually going to, ashamedly, I'm going to fly to Dubai rather than make the 12 to 13 hour journey across the desert, which I had really intended on doing. And I'm not someone who likes to back down from goals that I set for myself. But another thing was, I read on an expat forum that seemed to be primarily for Indian nationals that the border crossing, if you take the bus, can take the visa procedures from going from Saudi Arabia to the UAE can take up to 3 hours if it's a full bus, which is, you know, primarily South Asian male migrant workers who have to get all of their visas and their what are known as Iqama, which is the ID system, and all their documents have to be checked and stuff like that because they're not eligible for visa on arrival in the UAE, and which, as with a Western passport, you just would simply get stamped in. So just the idea, and I read an entire thread about the super long wait for the visas, and I just thought, I've been traveling for 3 straight months, and I'm like, I think I'm gonna just kind of call it a day and just jump on a one-way budget flight to Dubai. It was a tough call, but I'm also running out of money. I'm very, very close to running out of money, and I need to get back to the United States in the fairly near future. So there were a couple of factors there. But I tried to explore the idea. I think it's something that you really need to do in your own car, or you need to meet a local Saudi who like wants to go on holiday to Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Sharjah or something. But I couldn't find any, and I really tried. I just couldn't find what I was looking for. And I was able to find that in Jordan. I was able to find that in Iraq. I wasn't able to find it in Kuwait, but Kuwait is so small that I was able to just take a taxi. The other thing is, I calculated what it would cost to take a Kareem, not to Abu Dhabi, but just to the border of the Abu Dhabi Emirate. And it would have been like over $600 US or something. It was insane. So, not insane, but completely and utterly impractical. So, but I'm enjoying seeing this other really gritty part of Riyadh. This is not the Riyadh that they, you know, talk about in Vision 2030. This is like the OG grimy Riyadh, trash blowing around, think I even actually saw a couple of prostitutes in the lobby of a hotel. This is like, if there's a seedy part of the Saudi capital, this is for sure it. It's been interesting. I met some nice people, had some Indian food. I had a number of conversations with men about trying to cross the border, but this is, I mean, this neighborhood is primarily geared towards South Asian pilgrims who are trying to go to, as I said, to Mecca and Medina. That seems to be overwhelmingly what this neighborhood is geared toward, the transportation setup here. It's just overwhelmingly what it is, which is very cool, but I'm not trying to go in that direction. So something very cool is that on my failed trip to find a hoped-for border taxi, or just international taxi like I'd found from, say, Jordan to Iraq, is I stumbled upon the famous Riyadh water tower, which I recognize this thing. I forgot that it was in Riyadh, but I know that it's like a really epic landmark. It is, this thing is absolutely massive. Well, here above me is the famous Riyadh water tower. It was built by a Swedish architect out of Stockholm beginning in 1969 and was completed in 1971. This is a really famous Riyadhi landmark. Even, I've never been to Saudi Arabia, and I recognized it as soon as I saw it. It was built with profits from the early sort of oil boom years, and this was, at the time, it was actually the tallest building or man-made structure, I guess you should say, in the kingdom. And it's pretty cool. It's definitely got like a retro kind of feel to it. It is when the kingdom was growing fast enough, and particularly the city of Riyadh, that its water resources were so scant that they contracted out outsiders to basically build this to keep the water system in the city running. And it's pretty cool. It kind of looks like a giant cement dragon blood tree, those famous trees on Socotra Island off the coast of Yemen. One thing that surprises me about Riyadh is that, at least in the few nights I've been here, it seems to rain a good bit, which is something I wasn't expecting, in that it's essentially a city in the middle of one of the world's great deserts. But yeah, there's a decent sprinkle going on right now, and it's actually really refreshing. I welcome the rain here. This is the famous Ritz Carlton in Riyadh. Many American presidents have stayed here. It is, wow, this place is mind-blowing. I had to see this before leaving. I couldn't leave Riyadh without seeing this place. This is the definition of opulence.
The Ritz Carlton, of course, gained international notoriety when, on the night of 4 November 2017, hundreds of Saudi Arabia's most prominent businessmen, princes, and even some of its ulama, its Islamic scholars based in Mecca and Medina, were rounded up and confined in the Ritz Carlton, with prominent members of the Western press referring to it as a gilded or gold-plated prison. The world's most fabulously wealthy set of detainees were held here at the Ritz Carlton for nearly 3 months, until all were released by the end of January 2018, as the corruption purge by MBS was concluded. The Ritz Carlton purge seemed to signify a sea change in Saudi politics, where it would go from a more consensus-based political structure to essentially one-man rule under MBS.
And just across the road from the Ritz Carlton is the Courtyard Marriott.
It was here that the overflow of prisoners who couldn't fit in the Ritz Carlton were also housed.
Here's part of Riyadh's still as yet unfinished metro line. And it looks quite similar to Dubai, actually. Be curious to know who's building it. I'm here at King Khalid International Airport in Riyadh, and I'm boarding a flight to Dubai on Flynas, which is Saudi's budget airline. It's basically Riyadh's version of Fly Dubai. And I want to mention just a couple of different quick travel notes, maybe in no particular order of priority. But I couldn't get a Kareem taxi to the airport. The driver was just lagging, and I got fed up and canceled it. And I actually, for the first time since I got to Saudi, I hailed just a normal street taxi, like New York City style, of waving my arm out in the street, which are the green taxis you often see driving around and beeping to try and get your attention when you're waiting for a Kareem. The Kareem taxi quoted 75 riyals. I don't have a point of reference, so I guess that was fine. But he never showed up. So I got a really, really cool driver from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is in western Pakistan along the Afghan border, and he was fantastic. And he only wanted 60 riyals, but he had no way to take a card, and my Kareem was linked to my credit card. And so we ended up, I was like stressing about making the flight because we ended up having to leave. When I told him that I didn't have any cash, we ended up having to leave the airport, go to a petrol station. Then it turned out they got rid of the ATM at the petrol station. It was a whole rigmarole, and I was able to actually get cash from the cashier, as that job title would maybe indicate. And yeah, so I gave it. He even told me, he's like, just give me 50 riyals. I don't even care. And because he said that, I gave him 60 anyway. But then he got me to the airport. I got here in plenty of time. Didn't have to get here that much ahead of time, which was pretty cool. I was, thinking in kind of a Western mind frame that it's like, I'm like, oh my God, it's an international flight, going from the Kingdom to the UAE. You've got to be there 2 hours in advance. And my driver was like, no, he's like, you only need to be there like 45 minutes in advance. So that all worked out. And one thing that I want to note is that this was, I think, the most seamless security and immigration procedure I have ever encountered in the world. And I've been flying now for about 30 years, back and forth to the Middle East, all through the terror wars, take off your shoes, take off your belt, no bottled water, all this stuff. I come here, you don't have to take your belt off, you don't have to take your laptop out of your bag, yet back in America, we still have to do all this stuff because of what emanated from this part of the world, to put it very politely and rather blandly. So that I thought was really interesting. So I think the Kingdom here has done a really, really good job of just streamlining the airport, and everyone was super professional and super friendly. There were no frowns. Nobody gave me any attitude about how heavy my backpack was when I went to check it in. There was nobody gave me a tisk when they looked at my passport. It was all smiles all the way. It was really surprisingly good experience. Also, one other thing I want to note is that my driver informed me. He asked why I was flying today, and I told him that I had failed at my mission of trying to go by shared taxi from Riyadh to Abu Dhabi Emirate. And he goes, oh, you needed to have done that from Dammam. He said, from Dammam there are shared cars. He's like, there are shared cars that go to Qatar and shared cars that go to Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And I was like, I came from Dammam. Plus, if I had left from Dammam to Abu Dhabi, then I would have only seen one city in Saudi Arabia, which to me would have been really a waste, especially for how expensive the visa was and all the years I've been waiting for this place to open up. So next time I know, I basically could have sort of transited Saudi Arabia to keep this a purely, an unabashedly overland journey. So I had to make a big compromise by getting this budget airline, but I'm also really burned out from over 3 months of nonstop travel, and and Dubai is very familiar, so I'm really looking forward to going there. I'm actually staying in the same hotel that I stayed at before the pandemic, so to be honest, I'm really looking forward to this. this almost seems too easy. And this airport is incredibly nice as well. I mean, it's really, everything is brand new. You can tell how much energy and effort is being put into trying to rehabilitate the kingdom's image and modernize it at a very, very fast pace. And I don't think it's going to modernize, at the speed that the Emirates had done in the past 25 years, but they're certainly catching up here in Saudi for sure. This plane even has that new plane smell. Everything here is brand spanking new. Another kind of broad social observation that occurred to me in my time here is that I've never really met that many Saudis in my life, similar to Kuwaitis. There's no such thing as being in, New York or London or Paris and being like, oh, let's go to Little Saudi Arabia for dinner, or you're not in New York and you're not like, let's go to Kuwait town to get some grub. That's just not a thing. I think the oil wealth of these nations has kept them very isolated in a social sense, and so Saudis are often students or businessmen or other kind of more upper echelon types of travelers. You don't meet. So there's not really such a concept in the United States or the EU as really like Saudi immigrants. Working in the media, of course, we know of Saudi dissidents, which are people that have fallen out with the monarchy and are in exile for one reason or another, whether they are, people that stand for human rights or whether they are hardline Salafi jihadis. I think it runs a range, but there are, definitely, like London has like a Saudi dissident scene, but I've never been in London and been like, hey, let's go get Saudi food tonight. Like, that's just not really a thing. So, and I think the same really goes for a lot of the Gulf. You're not in Los Angeles like, hey, like, let's go to like Emirativille and like smoke some shisha or something. So one thing that was really rewarding about coming here was just being able to interact with Saudis. And another thing is that there is this Saudiization process going on with the labor force, where the kingdom is making this huge push to get Saudis working, so that as the country opens up to the outside world for tourism, you are actually interacting with Saudi nationals, which is diametrically opposed to being a tourist or a journalist or what have you in Kuwait. In Kuwait, the only Kuwaitis I interacted with were the officers at the border with Iraq and the officers at the border with Saudi Arabia. I didn't meet a single Kuwaiti, not a Kareem driver, not a hotel worker, not a restaurateur. I never interacted with a Kuwaiti in my time in Kuwait City. So something that's radically different here, and I think really refreshing, is that like when you do successfully call a Kareem, unlike my trip here to the airport, you actually meet a lot of Saudis. Now my Pashtun taxi driver told me that it's actually really hard now for South Asians to be taxi drivers. He said, whereas just a few years ago, I think he said like 3 years ago, before the Saudiization sort of workforce program, that he said all of the taxi drivers, or almost all of them, were either Pakistani, Indian, or Bangladeshi. And he said now, he told me that he's only allowed to drive a taxi because he's basically grandfathered in because he's been doing it for 16 years. He said, oh, I've been doing this since before 3 years ago. I mean, like, I'm going to Dubai. In Dubai, I will not meet an Emirati driving a taxi. I will not meet an Emirati at my hotel in Barsha Heights. And so, but Saudi's also a lot different in a lot of ways. One, it's like somewhere between 26 and 30 million people. Two, it's a giant country. This isn't a tiny emirate like Kuwait or Abu Dhabi or something. It's not. It's like a huge landmass with a lot of people, and the Crown Prince wants to get people working and not just having, not the stereotype of Saudis being, Saudi princes being debaucherous on the French Riviera, which is kind of the image of Saudi Arabia that I grew up with, which is like, was kind of, no alcohol, no no Bacchanali at home, but you know, oh, Saudis abroad, they get wild. That was always the, you know, the kind of the urban legend of at least, you know, upper class Saudi Arabia. And when you come here, the reality is actually much different and much more interesting. It's like you actually meet a lot of people and a lot of young people. And at my hotel in Dammam, the guy who checked me in, named Hashim, who was really cool, and shout out to Hashim if you're watching this, but he was telling me that like the government here wants, you know, young Saudis working at the hotels rather than migrant workers. And so, not that I'm, you know, not that I have a dog in that fight. I can't be for one or the other as a complete outsider. But I'm only just notating the cultural differences and this sort of societal shift here to have more of an indigenous workforce, which to me kind of made the trip more interesting. And it's also a draw to come back because, you know, you're meeting local people, not necessarily from the city they're in. I mean, most of, like, you would talk to a Kareem driver, they might be from a province, you know, in the very far north, you know, along the border with Iraq, or the very far south on the border with Yemen. But I don't know, just this place was definitely full of surprises. The learning curve, I would say, was, you know, as I've noted earlier, the learning curve was steep here, especially money-wise. It's not that Saudi Arabia is incredibly expensive. Like, if you come here to do like absolutely nothing, like if you just stay in a hotel and eat falafel, you can get by okay. But some of the excursions, like to go to this place called the Edge of the World, or to go to Al Ula, like it turned out they were, in my opinion, outrageously expensive and just not doable in a tight time frame and with a loose budget. And I think for me personally, I've just been traveling for too long, and I'd used up almost all of my money and credit cards by the time I got to Saudi Arabia. So I couldn't do all of the goals that I was hoping for. But that gives me a reason to come back. So, and that way it might be kind of a good thing.
Dear guest.